I want to now kind of shift gears a little bit to talk about the progression of the soul and life after death, and heavy topics, but especially relevant right now and always relevant. So can you explain a little bit what the Baha'i understanding of life after death and the progression of the soul is?
Yeah, again, it's like, whew. But I when we talked about like, what should we talk about? That was one of the things I thought we could kind of touch on, because I think that there's so much fear right now. These are, you've heard it a lot. These are unprecedented times. Like nobody who's alive right now has ever really experienced this, unless you're a few of these 104-year-olds that are getting, that are walking out of these coronavirus hospitals after having lived through the 1918 flu pandemic. We haven't lived through something like this. Like I'm looking at my my office, I have my little thing here, and you see there's people, you see that couple walking, they're walking around wearing masks. Like we're living in a movie, right? We've seen these movies. It's crazy. And the reason we wear masks, right, is so that we can protect someone else. But also we're wearing masks because we're afraid. We're afraid of being infected with this virus. And more than that, what's underneath that? We're afraid of what happens next. We're afraid that we could die. And why are we afraid that we can die? For a lot of reasons. One of is we don't know what happens when we die, right? We don't want to leave this world. We don't want to leave our friends and family. We don't want to leave our children, our parents. We don't want to go through that uncomfortable process of what might happen. And we don't know where the hell we're going. Let's be real. We know what each of the teachers, each of the prophets have told us, right? That there's this magical thing that exists outside. There's heaven, right? But there's also a lot of fear that comes with that, because there's a lot of judgment in what we've learned throughout religion. This idea that if you are not this, then you're not going to go there. And I get it to a certain extent, but that's not the Baha'i belief of what happens when we die. And so whenever I can, I try to share a little bit of that, because more than anything, I just want people to know that yes, it's good to be cautious, but we don't have to be afraid. We don't have to be afraid. We have to find a way to do things out of love, right? This idea that love and fear, that love never dwelleth in a heart possessed by fear, right? I'm going to say that quote one more time. Love never dwelleth in a heart possessed by fear. Fear and love have a hard time coexisting together. So when we're asked to stay home because of the pandemic, when we're asked to do these things, if we stay home because of love, then it changes everything that happens during the day. If we stay home because we love our parents, we love our elderly neighbors, we don't want to be carriers of this virus, that changes it. But if we stay home because of fear, then we're so much more likely to experience anxiety and depression. I know I've experienced anxiety during this pandemic, and it's not fun, because you're staying home and you're worried about people, you're worried about work and all of these things. There's 27 million people in our country unemployed right now. There's other reasons to be fearful, but to be fearful of death and dying is to not fully understand what God tells us about it. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to snap your fingers after you learn, as an example, what Baha'u'llah says about the afterlife, and suddenly not have any fear, but it will at least relieve some of the anxiety of the unknown. So here's what the Baha'i belief is, and here's the thing that's been so helpful to me over the course of my life, and the reason why I spent the last 7 years making these documentaries about individuals who have terminal illnesses. It's the reason why I made 5 Feet Apart, and Clouds, which is about to come out. I want people to feel comforted knowing that there's something that exists beyond what we see. So Baha'u'llah says that to understand death, we have to look at birth, okay? And he goes on, there's infinite topics that we could talk about today, but he goes on to say that for every physical law in the universe, there's a spiritual counterpart. Meaning, so again, to understand death, right, you look at birth. There's a spiritual counterpart to gravity. There's a spiritual counterpart to any of the physical laws in the universe. So why do we look at birth? Well, let's go down to what happens in the womb. You have a sperm and an egg that come together, souls formed, babies in the womb, and the baby is existing in what's called the matrix, right? Not the movie, but the matrix of the womb, and it has everything that it needs. It's getting its food, its sustenance, it's the perfect temperature. It's floating in this like magical little bubble where it's protected from the outside world, which doesn't know exists. It's developing things that it doesn't need in the womb. It's developing eyes so that one day it can see. But the baby in the womb has no use for its eyes in the womb. It's developing a nose and a sense of smell so that one day it can smell. But it doesn't need the sense of smell in the womb. It's developing lungs and a mouth and a tongue so it can taste, arms, legs so it can walk. But it has no use for any of these things in the womb because it's just sitting there growing them. It has no free will. It's doing it on its own accord. All the while, the baby is coexisting in a world infinite in scope to the world that it's in now, mere inches away. So just inches away on the other side of that womb lies the planet Earth, which it is also living in, right? There's a mother who's carrying it. There is a sky. There's a sun. We're on Earth, and it's orbiting the sun. There are clouds in the sky. There are trees. There are flowers so that you can smell. There's food so you can eat. There's ground so you can walk and run. There's sounds so you can hear. The baby has no freaking clue it's developing any of these things, nor does it know that it's right next to this magical, infinite world. But one day, the baby is going to die of the womb. It's going to die in an uncomfortable process and be born into this world that was right there the entire time. It's going to go through a tunnel, a dark tunnel where on the other end is light, and it's going to be greeted, ideally, by people that were waiting for it the whole time, that were watching it and helping it develop, that were praying for it and talking to it, by a mother who was eating hopefully the right foods, preparing herself for the birthing process, by a parent who's just going to be taking it in. And suddenly, as soon as it enters this new world, it has a use for all of those things that it was developing that it didn't know. It takes its first breath and it burns and it starts to cry, and suddenly there's a voice and it can smell and its eyes open and it can see, oh my God, there's light. And the whole time the baby was developing things and it didn't even know it needed them. But what's interesting about it, and what I love about this idea, is that when you think about the end of our lives, and you think about when we die of this world, which we know we're going to, and where we go, we know that we will not need any of the things we were developing in the womb in this life. Like, we won't need our arms and our legs for where we're going next. That's what I meant. Sorry. We won't need our arms and our legs and our eyes for where we're going next, because we leave our bodies here. Our bodies stay. But that means if energy can't be created or destroyed, and we are essentially energy, where do we go? And what do we need for that world? What do we need for where we're going next? Baha'u'llah says that in this life, this period of time that we're given, for some it's short, for others long, we are here to develop all of the spiritual attributes, the spiritual versions of our eyes and our ears and our arms and our legs, all of the things we can't see. We are here to develop all of those things, because those will become our eyes and our ears and our noses and our arms and legs where we're going next. What he also says is that where we're going next is coexisting with where we are now. Just like when we were in the womb, we were still here living in this life on earth. He says that the next life after we die is here. We just don't have the eyes to see it. And what separates us from this life to the next is as thin as the human eyelid. It's a thin veil. And just like when we were able to influence a baby in the womb, just like we know the baby was coming, all of the souls that we love that have passed on to the next world, that are no longer physically here, are here waiting for us, praying for us, helping us every single day, assisting us when we get those feelings, those premonitions, that intuition, that feeling of like, oh, maybe I should do that, or that these ideas, these are our family members, our friends, our angels who are coexisting with us, just like I was with my daughter while she was in the womb, praying for her, talking to her, playing her classical music. They are here with us the whole time. And we're told that where we're going next is as different as this world was to the womb. And so when you think about all of those things, when you put that into perspective, you go, oh, when I'm tested, when somebody pisses me off, when I'm struggling with something, when somebody hurts me, all of these are opportunities for me to develop those spiritual muscles, the spiritual arms and legs. What do they look like? Honesty, kindness, service, steadfastness, love, compassion, empathy. All of these things are the things we're going to need in the next world, whatever that looks like.